What are you obsessing about that man for? My goodness, girl, get a grip on yourself. You're here to see about Minister Paul, and here you are thinking about the coach. What is wrong with you? And I bet you he isn't giving you 1 minute's thought. She scolded herself as she pulled her mind back to the present and concentrated on what the doctor was saying. Your brother is lucky to be alive. The incident left him pretty broken up. He's had emergency surgery on his leg, which was broken in two places, and we had to remove his spleen. His left arm was also broken, and he suffered lacerations to his head and face. He received 45 stitches to close a wound on the left side of his face, and he's on oxygen because of a collapsed lung. Oh my God, said Angie, looking from Paul to Denise to the doctor. Okay, we can see that he was pretty banged up, and we understand about the lung and the spleen and all. But why did the priest say he wasn't expected to survive? Asked Denise as she put her arm around Angie's shoulders. Not wanting his conversation to be heard by the patient, the doctor asked the two women to accompany him out into the hall so that he could speak freely. Well, we spoke to your mother and acquired his medical history. And from what we learned, your brother was always a very healthy man. No history of smoking, drinking, or drugs. And his physical appearance seems to point out that he was in excellent physical health. So what's the problem? Asked Angie, speaking what she knew her friend Denise was thinking. Well, even though there was initially some internal bleeding, we were able to stop it. And although his injuries were extensive, they have been stabilized. His arm and leg have been set and his lacerations stitched. We've done everything we can see that needs to be done, but your brother seems to be getting worse. What do you mean, getting worse? Getting worse how? From the moment he came into the emergency room, your brother hasn't tried to sit up or move or speak or communicate in any way. It's almost like he's not fighting for his life. That's absurd. You sound like you're saying my brother wants to die, said Denise indignantly while looking incredulously at Angie. I'm not saying he wants to die, but he's not fighting to live. You don't know him. How do you know how he's supposed to respond? Everybody's different. Maybe because of the pain he's in, he can't respond to you in any kind of way. Maybe he is fighting, but because of the pain and the surgery, he can't communicate like he should. Your brother's vital signs are bad. His blood pressure is dangerously low, and he is not responding to any stimuli from the staff. He was conscious when he was brought in and wouldn't even tell us his name. We had to look in his wallet to get his information. That's how we spoke to your mother. Did you say anything to her about this? Asked Angie worriedly. No, of course not. But your brother should be trying to fight a little. He doesn't seem to be fighting. Can I talk to him? Of course, I'll leave you alone, but only for a few minutes. As the doctor left, Angie and Denise looked at each other with sad, knowing eyes and slowly made their way to Paul's bed. Looking down at the broken body of their new minister, tears rolled down each of their cheeks. Angie quietly said a prayer as Denise fought back the feeling of panic that rose in her as memories of her late husband again flooded her mind and almost caused her to break down in a heap of self-pity and grief. After Angie finished praying, she took hold of Paul's hand while speaking to him softly. She was trying to let him know they were there while trying to get any kind of response from him that would let them know he was aware of them. After 2 minutes, she gently let go of his hand and looked at Denise with a defeated look in her eyes. "Let me try," she said as she reached over and gently began to rub the back of Paul's hand while calling his name. "Paul, Paul, it's me, Denise Jones. I know you must be in a lot of pain and you can't speak, but we want you to know we're here for you. Your mother's been called and she's on her way, Paul. Can you hear me? The doctor said you're going to be fine, and we just wanted you to know that we're right here with you, okay? Paul, can you hear me? Please, sweetie, if you can hear me, try to squeeze my hand or open your eyes. This is Denise Jones." Fog, echoes, pain, voices, pain, fog. Paul was tired and confused and very, very sleepy. All he wanted to do was sleep. But the fog and the voices kept interrupting him. He couldn't understand why he was feeling pain in his left side, and he couldn't understand why he couldn't turn over in his bed and make this dream go away and stop the voices and the pain. He couldn't even understand why he was having a dream. He never dreamed. Why was he dreaming, and why couldn't he wake up? And why was he in pain? And why did he feel like someone had kicked him in the side? And why did his face hurt? And why did he smell alcohol? He was going to get up and get a drink of water and go back to bed and stop dreaming and getting comfortable and get warm and stop the voices and move the alcohol away from him. But he couldn't move. And he didn't want to move. And he was very tired. And he was very sleepy. And he was very confused. What was wrong with him? Why couldn't he wake up? Why did he smell alcohol? Why did he feel pain? Who was talking in his bedroom? What was happening? He didn't know how to get up. He didn't know how to stop the voices. All he knew at this moment was that he hurt. He couldn't ever remember hurting this bad in his entire life, and he didn't know why. Why was he hurting? And then he realized that he was more tired than he had ever felt in his life. He was so tired that if he could, he would just sleep forever if he could. He heard voices trying to break through the fog, and a surge of panic swept through him. But he was too tired to open his eyes to see who was talking in his bedroom. He felt someone touching him, and again the panic seized him. But again, he was too tired to open his eyes. When he realized that whoever was talking and touching him was not going to hurt him, he decided it must be a part of his dream, and that it would be okay if he just kept on sleeping. He heard a man calling his name. He didn't recognize this man and decided to ignore him. After all, it was only a man from his dream and would go away if he was ignored. He vaguely wondered if he was oversleeping and would be late for work, but decided he didn't really care since he was too tired to get up. Alarm again rose in him because he usually loved getting up for work and prided himself in never being late. Not wanting to go to work was definitely not like him. Something must be wrong if he didn't want to go to work. But then the fog got a little denser and the voices a little more blurry, and caring stopped. All he wanted to do was sleep. So he settled down in his bed, in his mind, and relaxed. Just then he heard something different. He heard a woman's voice, and she was saying something very important. She was saying words that he felt he needed to hear. She was saying words that would help him understand why he was in a fog and in pain and smelling alcohol. She was praying. The words of her prayer washed over Paul like a mist on a summer morning, and slowly the fog began to disappear. As the fog began to roll back, it was slowly replaced by memory. As Paul's memory began to return, fatigue and pain was slowly replaced with alarm and fear. He had been in an accident, a horrible accident, and he was in a hospital. He was broken and scarred and not in control of his life anymore. Thinking about the unexpected, unwanted path he was suddenly forced to take caused his fear to turn into depression. This was not in his life plan. He was supposed to be embarking on a new path of success, and this was not in the blueprint. Depression was slowly replaced by anger. Why? Why did this have to happen to him? Why did this have to happen to him now? He was in a new city, in a new church, and about to try to get into a new relationship, and all of a sudden, he was flat on his back in the hospital. He tried to think about what could not get his mouth to respond to the command from his brain. He tried to sit up, but his body would not move. Anger was slowly replaced by confusion. How was he supposed to serve God if he couldn't walk or talk? How was he supposed to be an effective minister if he was incapacitated? Confusion was slowly replaced by defeat. His mother was right. He had foolishly made plans without consulting God, and he was being punished. He had become cocky and too sure of himself and had to be knocked down a peg, too. Defeat was slowly replaced by resignation. He was tired. He felt like he had gambled and lost. He was battered, bruised, and broken and embarrassed. He didn't want to have to face his mother and see the look of "I told you so" in her eyes. He didn't want to face the members of his new church and see the look of pity that he was sure would be in their eyes. He just wanted to sleep, and he didn't think there was anything anybody could say or do that would make him feel any different. And then he heard her voice. The fog had continued to lift, but he had not moved. He could hear the sound of the hospitals around him clearly, but he had not moved. The muted sounds of traffic wafted its way up to his window, and he had not moved. But suddenly, he heard another woman calling his name. She was asking him if he could hear her, and her voice seemed to wash over him in waves of strength and love and sincerity. Suddenly, The fog was gone. He wanted to look into her eyes. He felt her touch his hand, and his heart leapt. She was here. Denise was here by his side, and suddenly he didn't feel like all was lost. She was standing by his bedside, and she was telling him that he was going to be all right. She was asking him if he could squeeze her hand or open his eyes. A surge of hope poured through him, and he felt he had been given a second chance. He pushed past the remainder of the fog that had clung to him and forced his mind to wrap itself around consciousness as he focused all his energy into his hand and closed itself around the hand of Denise Jones. He wasn't ready for the life-altering effects of an automobile accident, but he was ready to face whatever was coming his way with Denise Jones by his side. All things work together for the good to them that love the Lord was one of Paul's favorite scriptures, and he always stood on the Word of God. Whether he understood it or not, he always trusted in God. He knew that sometimes he was a little presumptuous, a little independent, a little headstrong, a little cocky, but he never meant to override God in his decisions or plans. Although his mother and others always told him to reconsider his actions, he was always telling himself that God knew what he truly felt in his heart. And even though he might not express it clearly, its true meaning was clear. So as he lay in a hospital bed broken, he was definitely confident that it was God's way of bringing the woman of his dreams to his side. So what if it had taken a near fatal car accident to get her here? The fact of the matter was she was here. And suddenly the pain was not so bad anymore. He focused all his attention and strength into his hand and gently squeezed. "He's squeezing my hand," she said excitedly to Angie as she felt the pressure of her touch being returned. "Oh, praise the Lord. I'll go get the doctor," answered Angie with a big smile as she hurriedly left the room. The relief that had flooded through Denise was so enormous that she almost wanted to shout to the top of her voice. She looked down at Paul's handsome face and began to thank God that he was showing some signs of fighting and was confident that he would survive this horrible ordeal. She knew he was in for a rough recovery, but she was confident he would pull through. Suddenly, a feeling of dread so strong and frightening washed over her that it was almost as if someone had punched her in her stomach. She gasped, dropped Paul's hand, and moved away from the bed. Something was wrong. Denise felt it in her spirit. Something was wrong, and it was not concerning Paul. Looking around in confusion, Denise jumped with alarm when Angie and the doctor walked back into the room. She backed away from the bed to allow the doctor to get to Paul and avoided looking into Angie's eyes that were searching her face, confused at the excitement that was evident in it when she had left the room and was no longer there. Suddenly, she felt a tingle in her right side. Looking confusingly around, she tried to figure out what the source of the tingling was when she remembered she hadn't turned her phone off, but had put it on vibrate. She never wanted to be unreachable to her kids, so she never turned it off during the day, just put it on vibrate. She never knew when she would be needed. She slowly backed out of the room and snuck a peek at her phone to see who was calling her, expecting it to be the pastor, but was shocked almost speechless when she saw who the caller was. What in the world? What's the matter? Asked Angie as she followed her out of the room because she could tell something was bothering her. Denise was glad her complexion did not make it possible for others to see her blush, because she felt the color begin to rise up from her neck and bloom like a mushroom over her cheeks. "It's William," she whispered. She didn't know why she suddenly felt embarrassed to be standing here with Paul. She was doing missionary work for the Lord, and she wasn't doing anything wrong. What possible reason could she have for being embarrassed? She wasn't involved with William. As a matter of fact, he had not so much as even made an attempt to show that he was the least bit interested in having a relationship with her. Of course, he was polite to her and he got along very well with her kids, but that didn't mean anything. Just because he held her hand a little long when he was greeting her after church services, or stared into her eyes a little more intently than he did anyone else's, so what? That didn't mean anything. Still, she was a bit flustered that he was calling her. He had never called her on her cell phone before. What could he possibly want? And then a wave of panic washed over her like a tidal wave. The kids. He must be calling her because something had happened to the kids. Looking at Angie with fear in her eyes, she moved away from Paul's room and spoke into her phone in a frantic whisper. "Hello? Hello, William, hello? Hi, Denise. Sorry to be calling you on your cell, but Matt gave me the number." "Why are you calling? Is Matt all right? What's wrong?" "Calm down. Matt is fine. But there was a little problem at school today, and I brought him home. He is not injured in any way, and the girls are fine as well. I hope you weren't in the middle of something important, but I think you should come home." Again, the feeling of being caught with another man made her blush. But realizing that she was being silly, she shook her head and pushed the thought out of her mind. "No, I wasn't doing anything I can't put off. I'll be right there," she said, and wondered why she didn't tell him she was at the hospital to see Paul. Motioning for Angie to come to where she was, she told her about the phone call and asked if she would mind staying with Paul while she rushed home. "Absolutely not. You go ahead and take care of your business, girl. I'll stay here and pray with him a while. Matt's not hurt, is he?" "No. Will assured me that he and the girls were okay, but he's bringing Matt home. I don't know what's going on, and I wonder why the school didn't call me about this. Well, I'll find out the details when I get home. Sorry, I have to leave you here, and thanks. Don't mention it. Call me later." "I will." And with that, she turned around and almost sprinted out of the hospital. Even though Will had told her Matt was unhurt, she still couldn't help but feel a sense of urgency as she hurried to her car. A million questions were racing through her mind. Why hadn't the school called her? Why hadn't Matt called her? Why was he being sent home in the first place? Where was Ned and Vet? Was her makeup and hair okay? "Girl, you have got to be kidding me," she scolded herself. "Your son has been sent home from school and you don't even know why. For all you know, he could have been in a fight and have bruises all over his body. And here you are wondering if your makeup and hair are fine just because Will is there. You better get yourself together." As she walked out of the hospital, the bright glare of the sun temporarily blinded her, forcing her to close them for a moment as they adjusted to the sudden brightness. When she opened them, she quickly scanned the cars that were passing in front of the hospital just in time to see a familiar maroon car with a familiar figure in the front seat looking in her direction. Was that Gavin she had seen riding past the hospital and looking at her? That was impossible. He lived clear on the other side of Long Island. She couldn't possibly have seen him. Could she? Well, no matter if she did or not, so what? It was probably someone that looked like him, and if it was him, she was sure he had a perfectly good reason for being there. Till after the strange call she had received from that morning came back to her, it was a little unsettling to maybe see him passing by the hospital in the area he lived so far from. Whatever, she thought, channeling her mind back to the situation at hand. She had better things to occupy her mind with than Gavin. She got into her car, buckled up, adjusted the mirror, slowly left the hospital parking lot, eased her way into the mid afternoon traffic, and headed to her house with her mind totally occupied with thoughts of her son and his dilemma. She silently prayed as she drove, asking God to prepare her mind and her spirit for what was waiting for her at home. She didn't know what to expect, but she did know that she wanted to handle it with patience and understanding.